Today, more than ever before, the power to create something beautiful is right at your fingertips. You no longer need years of experience or deep technical knowledge to build something that turns heads and sparks curiosity. In this tutorial, we're going to create something truly special, a stunning 3D startup landing page. We'll be using React, the engine that helps us build dynamic user interfaces. Tailwind CSS, our design palette, giving us the power to style with precision and speed, and Spline, the tool that breathes life into our page with elegant, interactive 3D visuals. Now, if you're just starting out, this project is made for you. We're keeping things clean, simple, and friendly for beginners, but still powerful enough to impress. And when we're done, you won't just have code sitting on a screen. You'll have a fully responsive, visually stunning application, something that could live in your portfolio. I'll guide you through every step of the process, making sure no detail is left out. If you find this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support really helps us grow and keep bringing you quality tech content. All right, let's jump right in and get started. All right, team, as always, we're starting completely from scratch. First things first, let's create a new folder on your desktop or wherever you like. Now, drag and drop that empty folder into your favorite code editor. For me, that's VS Code, but you can use whatever you like. Next up, let's open Google and search for Tailwind CSS. Click on the official Tailwind website. It should be the first result. Now, up at the top left, click on that version dropdown and let's switch it to a previous version, because sometimes newer versions have breaking changes, and for this tutorial, we'll stick to a stable, familiar version. Great. Now use the search bar at the top of the Tailwind website and search for Vite. You should see a result saying install Tailwind CSS with Vite. Click on that. Perfect. Now we're on the guide page. The first thing it shows us is a command to create a new project using Vite. Copy that command. All right, now open the terminal in your code editor. Paste that command you copied. But we don't want Vite to create a new folder. We want all our files to live directly inside the folder we already created. So when we run the command after Vite at latest, add / like this. This / just means, hey, create the project inside the current folder, and hit enter. The terminal will now ask us a few things. 1, package name. Just press tab to accept default and enter. 2, select a framework. Move down and select React. 3, select a variant. Choose JavaScript, not TypeScript. And that's it. Now, one last setup step. Run this command, npm install. This installs all the dependencies that Vite and React need to get the project running. Wait for a few seconds while it installs everything. Now, Vite has automatically created a project structure for us. All right, moving on. The next step is to install Tailwind CSS into our Vite project. First, let's head back over to the Tailwind CSS website. Here, you'll see there are 2 important commands we need in order to set up Tailwind properly. Let's quickly understand what they do. The first command is used to install 3 essential packages into our project. First, it installs Tailwind CSS, which is the main library providing all the utility classes we'll be using. Second, it installs PostCSS, which is a tool that helps Tailwind process and transform our CSS behind the scenes. And third, it installs Auto Prefixer, which automatically adds the necessary vendor prefixes so our styles are compatible with all modern browsers. After that, we have the second command. This command is used to initialize Tailwind inside our project, and it will automatically generate 2 important configuration files for us. One is the Tailwind config file, which allows us to customize Tailwind settings according to our project's needs. And the other is the post-CSS config file, which helps Vite know how to handle the CSS processing. Now let's go ahead and copy both of those commands. Open the terminal, paste them in, and hit enter. Let's give it a few seconds to finish installing. Once that's done, you'll see that the 2 configuration files have been created for us. That means Tailwind has been successfully initialized. Now we need to configure the template paths, so Tailwind knows where to look for our class names. Next, we'll copy the updated configuration from the Tailwind documentation we'll open the Tailwind configuration file. Inside, you'll see some default content. Let's go ahead and delete everything inside that file and paste it in. This updated setup will tell Tailwind to scan all our HTML files and all the JavaScript files inside the source folder, ensuring it picks up all the classes we use. Once that's done, the final step is to set up our main CSS file to work with Tailwind. We'll copy 3 simple Tailwind directives. Inside the SRC folder, you'll find a file called index.css. Let's open it up and, just like before, delete everything inside to start fresh. Then, paste them into the file. These directives are what bring in Tailwind's base styles, reusable components, and all its utility classes. And just like that, Tailwind CSS is fully installed, configured, and ready to go in our Vite project. All right, now that we've set up Tailwind CSS, it's time to run our project and make sure everything is working properly. To do that, let's open our terminal and run the command that starts the development server. Once you run it, you'll see a local server link appear in the terminal. Simply hold Control and click on the link to open up the online version of your project in your browser. Perfect. If everything is working fine, you should see your basic React app running. We want to make sure Tailwind CSS is actually working in our React setup. To do that, we're going to use a little test straight from the Tailwind CSS documentation. Let's go to the app.jsx file, which lives inside the SRC folder. Once we're inside that file, we delete everything that's already there. Then we paste in a basic example from Tailwind's own docs. This code simply returns a piece of text that says "Hello World," bold and underlined. That's it. That confirms our Tailwind setup is connected and functional. Now let's clean up the folder a bit. Inside that same SRC folder, we'll notice a file called app.css. We're not going to use this file because all of our styles will live inside Tailwind's utility classes and shared global styles. So we go ahead and delete app.css. No need to keep unused files around. Next, we open the index.css file, also in the SRC folder. This is where we already have the 3 special Tailwind directives at the top. These lines are what allow us to use Tailwind across the whole app. Now we move right below those directives, and here we're going to add some custom base styles for our project using Tailwind's layering system. We define a new section using @layerBase, and inside it we target the body element. What we're doing here is applying a set of Tailwind classes to the body itself, so every page in our app starts with the same look and feel. Here's what we apply. First, BG Black gives our entire app a black background. Then text white makes sure that all default text is white, standing out clearly on that dark background. We use relative so the body has a positioning context, which will help later if we want to absolutely position something inside the page. Next, Font Sans switches the default font to a clean sans serif typeface, simple and modern. Then HScreen makes the body take up the full height of the browser window. Finally, Overflow X Hidden hides any horizontal scrolling, which protects us from layout shifts if something accidentally sticks out too far to the side. So now let's navigate back into our app.jsx file inside the SRC folder. At this point, we still have that placeholder h1 element that says "Hello World." So the first thing we do is delete that h1. We're replacing it with a new structure. We're going to add a main element, which will become the main section of our application. Now, the very first visual piece we want to add is a gradient image that adds some color and depth to our layout. Specifically, we're going to place it in the top right corner of the page, and we want it to have a subtle shadow-like effect that sits behind everything else. To do that, we need an image. I've prepared a gradient image for you already. You can find it in the GitHub repository. I've linked down below in the description of this video. So go ahead and open that link. If you like the project, feel free to give it a star to support it. Once you're in the repo, look for a folder called Images, and inside that you'll see a file named gradient.png. Click on that file, and in the top right corner of GitHub's preview page, you'll see the download button. Go ahead and download that image to your computer. Once the image is saved, head back to your code editor. Now open the public folder in your React project. Simply drag and drop the gradient image into the public folder. Take a quick moment to make sure it's inside there. That's important. Now that the image is in the right place, we go back to our app.jsx file, and inside our new main section, In the circ attribute of that image, we point directly to the file by using a path that starts with a forward slash, like /gradient.png. This tells React to load the file from the public folder. Now the image is showing up in our app, but we want it to look and behave a specific way. We're going to style it using Tailwind classes, so let's give the image a class name and walk through what each utility does. First, we apply absolute, which takes the image out of the normal flow of the document and lets us place it freely anywhere in the layout. Then we use top 0 to pin it to the very top edge of the screen, and right 0 to pin it to the right edge. So now it's sitting in the top right corner of the page. Next, we add opacity 60. This makes the image semi-transparent. And finally, we add NAS Z10. This pushes the image behind all other elements on the page using the Z-index system. Perfect. Now that we've got our gradient image set up in the top right corner, we're going to enhance the atmosphere a little more by adding a soft, glowing spotlight effect. And we'll do this using a blurred shadow on a simple div. So right below the image element inside our main section, we're going to add a new div element. This div won't contain any text or content. It's purely for visual effect. Think of it like a floating colored glow that sits behind everything else on the screen, almost like a lighting effect. Now let's break down how we'll style it. We'll use Tailwind's utility classes directly on the div using the class name attribute. First up, we give it a height of 0 using h0. The glow will come from the shadow, not from the div itself. Next, we set the width to a custom value. We use Tailwind's bracket syntax to define an exact width, in this case 40 rem. Then we position it absolutely with absolute. We use top 20% to push it down from the top a bit, about a fifth of the way down the page, and right -5% to nudge it slightly off to the right outside the normal boundary. That negative percentage shifts it just enough to peek in from the side in a natural way. Now here comes the magic. We add a custom shadow. This is a really intense, soft shadow. It has no horizontal or vertical offset, which centers the glow around the div. The blur is massive, 900 pixels, and we set the spread to 20 pixels, which gives it a nice reach. The color is a warm, soft orange, E99B63. We also apply a slight tilt to the glow using rotate 30 gang. This just turns the div a bit to the side, giving the light effect some motion and character. It feels more dynamic than a straight-on shadow. Finally, we push it behind all other content with Z10. So just like the gradient image, this glow stays in the background. It doesn't interfere with any text, buttons, or images we add later on. All right, now that we've got some nice effects on the page, it's time to start structuring our app more fully. Let's dive into creating the header of our application. So first, we'll go into the SRC folder, and inside this folder, we'll create a new one called Components. Components are like little building blocks of our application that we can use over and over, and the header will definitely be one of them. Now that we've got our Components folder, we're going to create a new file inside it called header.jsx. This is where all the magic for our header will happen. We open this new file, and for efficiency, we can use a shortcut here. If you're using Visual Studio Code or a similar editor, type rafs and hit enter. This will automatically generate the basic structure for a functional component: React import, function declaration, and return statement. If the shortcut doesn't work for you, it might be because the ES7 React Snippets extension is not installed in your editor. If that's the case, head to the Extensions panel of your editor, search for ES7 React Snippets, and install it. Once that's done, the shortcut should work perfectly. Next, we'll clean up a little. In the newer versions of React, we don't need to import React explicitly at the top of every file anymore. Now, inside the return statement, we'll find a div element. We're going to delete this div and replace it with a header element. This makes our code more semantic. Now let's style our header using Tailwind CSS. We're going to add a class name to the header element. We apply a few utility classes to get everything positioned and spaced just right. First, we use flex, so we can easily align and distribute items inside it. Next, we use justify between. Then, item center vertically aligns everything in the center. We also want to add some padding to give the content breathing room. We apply pi4 for vertical padding top and bottom, and px4 for horizontal padding left and right. These values work well for smaller screens. However, when the screen size gets bigger, we want to increase the horizontal padding to give the header more space. So we add LGPX-20, which applies more padding on large screens. Great, now we're ready to start building out the content inside our header. And the first thing we'll add is the logo. We'll start with a simple text-based logo using an H1 element. You can put whatever name or title you like inside it. Now, we want this logo text to stand out. So let's style it using Tailwind CSS. We start by applying Text 3XL, which gives us a nice large font size by default. Then we scale it up responsively by adding MD Text 4XL, which increases the size a bit more on medium-sized screens, and LG Text 5XL for even larger text on large screens. This way, our logo adjusts nicely based on the user's device. Next, we apply font light to make the weight of the text a little softer. And finally, we use M0 to remove any default margins that might be added by the browser. All right, so our logo is now inside the header and styled, but if we go and check the browser right now, we won't see it. That's because we haven't actually used the header component in our app yet. It exists, but it's not connected to anything. So let's switch over to our app.jsx file and bring it in. At the top of the file, we need to import the header component. Now that we've imported it, we also need to use it. Inside the return statement of our app component, we go to the main element, and right below the blur effect div, we add our header component. This is just like placing a regular HTML element, but instead, we're using our custom header. Now that our header is showing up, we can go back to the header.jsx file and keep adding more elements. Let's go ahead and build out the navigation section for desktop screens. So right underneath that H1 logo element, let's create a nav element. Inside this nav, let's start by creating our first anchor tag. Think of this as a clickable link. For the label, we'll use the word company. Once the anchor tag is in place, we'll style it to look clean and interactive. We'll apply a few Tailwind classes here. First, we use text base to keep the font size consistent and readable. Then, tracking wider gives a bit of extra spacing between the letters, which makes the link look more open and professional. Next, transition colors enables smooth color changes when someone hovers over the link, and we use hover text gray 300 to actually change the color on hover. This adds a subtle but nice effect for desktop users. Finally, we use Z50 to make sure the navigation items sit above background effects, like the blur or gradient, so nothing overlaps them visually. Now we want a total of 4 navigation links, so we simply copy this anchor tag 3 more times and change the label text of each one. At this point, all the anchor tags are in place, but they're stacked and not looking well aligned yet. So we turn our attention to the nav element itself. We give it a class name to properly style and position these links. We start with hidden, which hides the navigation on small screens. We don't want to show this on mobile yet. Then we add mdeflex, which tells the browser to display this element as a flexbox layout starting from medium screen sizes and up. That means once we hit tablet or desktop sizes, the navigation becomes visible. We also apply item center to vertically align the links in the middle of the header, and finally gap 12 to create equal spacing between each of the navigation links. With our navigation complete, let's now move on to adding a sign-in button. So right underneath the nav element, we create a button element and add the text sign in inside it. Let's go ahead and style this button using Tailwind as well. We begin with hidden MD block, which hides the button on small screens but makes it visible starting from medium sizes and up. Again, this is part of the desktop layout. We apply BG A7 to set the button's background color to a custom light gray. Then we use text black for the font color to ensure it contrasts and is easy to read. We apply PY3PX8 to add vertical and horizontal padding, giving the button a nice balanced size. Then we make it a pill shape with rounded full, remove any default border using border none, and give it a clean, modern text style with font medium. Next, to make this button feel interactive, we use transition all and duration 500 to animate any changes smoothly over half a second. Then we add hover BG white to change the background color when hovered, giving users some visual feedback. Finally, cursor pointer ensures the mouse changes to a pointer icon when hovering over the button, and we finish with Z50 again to make sure it appears above any background effects. But now it's time to make this header responsive for mobile users. On smaller screens, we're not going to show all those links right away. Instead, we'll provide a neat menu icon that users can tap to open a sidebar. So let's scroll down to the very bottom inside our header element, and right below all the existing content, right after the sign-in button, we're going to add a new button element. This is going to be our menu trigger for mobile screens. Inside this button, we want a menu icon, something visually clear and recognizable. To get one, let's open our browser and head to boxycons.com. Just search for Boxycons on Google and click into the first result. Once you're there, look at the top navigation and click on the Usage tab. On this page, you'll see a few ways to install Boxycons. We're going to use the npm install method so that it integrates cleanly with our React project. Copy the npm command provided, something like npm install Boxycons, and now let's head back to our code editor. Open up the terminal if it's not already open. Now before installing, we need to stop the development server from running. So in the terminal, press Ctrl-C. Once it stops, paste the command and hit enter to install Boxycons. After the installation is complete, we need to import the Boxycon CSS into our header component so the icons will render properly. Let's scroll to the top of our header.jsx file and add an import line that brings in boxycons/css/boxycons.min.css. That's it. Boxycons are now ready to use in our project. Let's return to the Boxycons website, go back to the homepage, and in the search bar there, type menu to find a good menu icon. Pick the one you like. Click on it and then make sure you choose the font option. That will give us a snippet of HTML code with an E tag and some class names. Copy that code. Now we're back in the code editor. Inside the button element we just created, let's paste that I tag. That gives us the visual menu icon inside the button. Before we begin styling the menu button, remember that we previously stopped the project from running. Let's start it up again. Open your terminal and run the following command, npm run dev. Next, it's time to style this menu button so it looks great and only shows up when it's supposed to. Let's give it a class name and apply Tailwind classes. First, we use MD hidden to make sure the button is only visible on small screens. This hides it from medium size and up, which is perfect for desktop. Next, we apply text 3XL to make the icon big enough to tap comfortably, especially on mobile devices. Then we add some padding with P2 so it doesn't feel cramped. And finally, we include Z50 to ensure the icon stays above any background layers or effects. Now we're going to move forward and build the actual sidebar that this button will eventually open. This sidebar will be specifically for mobile screens and will provide a smooth and accessible way for users to navigate the site. Just right below the menu button element, we'll create a new div. This div is going to act as the container for our mobile sidebar. Inside this div, we're going to add a nav element. Think of this nav as the mobile version of the navigation menu we created earlier for desktops. Now, instead of rewriting everything from scratch, let's go up to the desktop nav section and copy those 4 anchor tags we made earlier. Once we've copied them, let's paste them inside the new nav element in the sidebar. Make sure everything is properly indented, nice and clean, so it stays readable and easy to maintain. Now that the anchor tags are inside our mobile nav, let's give it a class name and apply Tailwind utility classes. We'll go with flex, then flex call so the links stack vertically instead of side by side. We add gap 6 to give each link some breathing room, and items center to center everything horizontally. Simple and effective. Now let's turn our attention to the outer div, the main container of the sidebar. This needs to stretch across the full width of the screen and position itself over the content when it's active. To do that, we'll make it fixed so it stays in place. We'll anchor it using top 16 so it starts just below the header, and then use bottom 0, right 0, and left 0 to stretch it all the way down and across the screen. We add P5 to give the contents inside some padding. Then we use MD hidden to make sure this sidebar only appears on small screens. We also add Z40 to keep it layered just below the menu button And for the visual style, we apply BG Black, BG Opacity 70 to create a dark, transparent background. Finally, we use Backdrop Blur MD, which gives that modern, frosted glass blur effect. Very sleek, very clean. All right, so we've got the final visual layout of our mobile navigation ready. Now it's time to bring it to life with a bit of functionality. What we want to do here is make it so that when a user taps the menu icon, the mobile nav bar appears, and when they tap it again, it disappears. So first, let's head down to the mobile menu's main container, the one wrapping the sidebar, and let's make sure this section is hidden by default. That way, when the page loads, users don't immediately see the mobile nav. We simply apply the hidden class to this container, and just as importantly, we'll give this element an ID so we can reference it in our code. Let's call it mobile menu using camel case. This makes it easy to select later. Now that this element is hidden and has an ID, let's scroll up in our header.jsx file to the top of the component, and just above the return statement, we're going to write a simple function. This function will be responsible for toggling the visibility of the mobile menu. Let's name it toggle mobile menu. Inside this function, the first thing we do is use document.getElementById to grab the mobile menu by its ID. Now that we have access to that element, we can check if it currently has the hidden class. If it does, that means the menu is currently invisible, so we remove the class to make it appear. On the other hand, if the class isn't there, we add hidden back to hide the menu again. This is a really simple but effective toggle, just checking for a class and flipping it depending on the state. And that's it for the function. Now that we've written the logic for toggling the mobile menu, let's put it to use in our project. So we'll scroll down to where we've got our menu button. Right on that button element, we'll add an onClick attribute. Inside this attribute, we'll pass in the name of the function we just created, which is toggle mobile menu. This tells React that whenever this button gets clicked, we want to trigger that toggle logic. Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done in a reliable way. And with that, we've officially wrapped up the header section of our project. Now here's where the fun really begins. We're moving into building out the hero section. Let's dive in and start crafting that hero layout next. First, we're going to open up our components folder, and inside there, we'll create a brand new component file called hero.jsx. This is going to house everything related to our hero section. Now, once the file is created, just type out RAFCE, and if you've got the ES7 React snippets extension installed, it'll scaffold out a functional component for us automatically. Next, let's make sure this new hero component actually appears on our page. So we'll head over to the app.jsx file. Up at the top, we'll import the hero component so React knows about it. Then down in the return statement inside our main container, just below where we place the header, we'll drop in our hero/component to render it right there on the screen. All right, now let's go back into the hero.jsx file. First thing we'll do is clean up a bit. At the top of the file, we'll remove the import for React because with the newer versions of React, we no longer need to manually import React at the top of every component. Then, inside the return statement, we'll replace the default div with a main element. Now let's give our main element some Tailwind CSS classes to lay out the structure. We'll apply a flex display to handle layout. We're also giving it a top margin on large screens using LG MT20 just to create some breathing room beneath the header. And we'll say flex call to stack elements vertically by default. But for larger screens, we'll switch to flex row with LG flex row to position elements side by side. We also apply items center to vertically align the content in the center and justify between to space out the child elements evenly across the row. And finally, we set a minimum height using min-h calc 90h-6rem, which takes 90% of the viewport height minus the height of the header, ensuring our hero section fills up the screen nicely without overflowing. All right, let's dive right into the next section of our hero component. First, we're going to create a new div element that will serve as the container for everything on the left side of our hero section. The right side of the hero will later contain our 3D model, but for now we're focusing just on the left. Let's give this left side container a class name to position and style it nicely. We use max WXL to restrict its width so it doesn't stretch too far on large screens. ML% pushes it a bit from the left edge. Z10 makes sure it's sitting above the background elements like the image and blur effects. And we handle top margins responsively. On small screens, we push it down, then reduce it to MT 60% on medium screens, and reset it to MT 0 on large screens where layout naturally aligns better. Now, inside this container div, the first element we'll add is our tag box, a small visual element at the top of the hero that introduces the content. To build that, we create a wrapper div and then nest another div inside it. This inner div will actually hold the icon and the label text. Before we can add the icon, we need to make sure we can use boxicons in this file. To do that, let's jump back to our header.jsx file where we already imported the boxicon CSS. From there, we just copy the import line and come back to our hero.jsx file. At the very top, we paste that line in to make boxicons available inside our hero component. Now let's visit boxicons.com, search for a diamond icon, and once we find one we like, we'll select the font option and copy the provided HTML code. We paste that right inside the inner div we created, right next to the label text which says Introducing. Now let's style the outer gradient border. We give it a class name that includes relative for positioning, a width of 95% on small screens, and a fixed width of W48 on slightly larger screens. We make the height H10 to get a pill-like shape. Then we apply a gradient background using BG-a gradient to R, which goes from gray to a warm tone. To give it a glowing look, we add a subtle shadow using shadow 050px RGB to 55.4 and finally round it off fully with rounded full. Inside this gradient border, we style the actual black container for our content. This is the inner div where the icon and the text sit. We position it with absolute and ins3dex, which means it sits inside the outer border with a small 3-pixel margin all around. We give it a black background using BG black, round it fully again with rounded full, and center its content both horizontally and vertically using flex, item center, and justify center. We also add a bit of spacing between the icon and text with gap 1. And that wraps up our tag box section. And now it's time to add the main heading and description, which are key parts of any hero layout. So right below that tag box, we go ahead and create an H1 element. This will serve as the main headline. We're putting the words email for on the first line and developers right below that using a simple line break tag in between. To make this heading look great, we give it a set of responsive and clean Tailwind classes. We start with text 3XL for mobile devices, then we progressively increase the font size with breakpoints. SM text 4L, MD text 5XL, and all the way up to LG text 6L for large desktop screens. This approach ensures the heading adapts beautifully to different screen sizes. Next, we add font semi-bold to make the text bold but not too heavy, keeping it professional. Tracking wider spreads the letters out slightly, giving it a more open and polished look. And finally, we use My8 to add vertical margin. Now, right below this heading, let's add a short description paragraph. This is where we give users a quick summary or value proposition. We wrap it in a P element and place a sentence or two that supports the headline, something short, clear, and compelling. To style this paragraph, we give it a class name starting with TextBase, which gives it a good size for body text on small screens. Then we bump it up slightly on medium screens using sem text LG so it scales well. We use tracking wider again to maintain that clean spacing between letters, and text gray 400 for a soft contrast against the darker background. This makes the text readable without overpowering the heading. We also limit its width with max 25 rem on most screens and extend that slightly to LG max W trim on larger displays to maintain an optimal line length for readability. All right, so now we're moving on to a really nice finishing touch for the left side of our hero section, the call to action buttons. We start by creating a div element that will serve as the container for both of our buttons. Inside that container, we create our first button using an anchor tag. This button will say documentation, and will also include a link icon from Boxicons right inside of it. Go to boxicons.com, search for a link or document-related icon, copy the font style snippet, and paste it inside the anchor tag just after the text. Now let's style this anchor tag. We're using a thin border with a slightly gray tone, some padding to make the button feel roomy, a rounded full shape for that modern pill button look, and font. And we also add a smooth transition for that touch of polish, and hover effects that make it interactive and accessible. The hover background darkened for visual feedback when hovered over. Next, we duplicate this entire anchor tag to create our second button. Just paste it right below the first one. Then, change the text inside to say Get Started. We also adjust the padding slightly to make it feel a little larger and bolder. This second button is styled slightly differently to indicate it's the primary action. We make it stand out by applying a light gray background, switch the text color to black, and add a hover effect that changes the text to white, reinforcing the interactive feel. Everything looks great so far. We just need to adjust the gap and positioning of the buttons. To do that, let's add a class name to the container div that holds the buttons and set it to flex gap 4 mt12. That should take care of the layout. With the left section of our hero complete, it's time to move on and add the 3D element to the right side. This adds a whole new layer of engagement for users, and the best part, it's easier than you think. So first, inside our hero component, we're going to move just below the container div that holds all the content for the left side. Right beneath that closing div, I've already prepared the 3D model for you. You'll find the link in the description box below this video. When you open that link, you'll be taken to the Spline design file. But before that, you'll need to open your browser and go to Spline's website. If you don't have an account already, take a minute to sign up. It's free. Then, at the top, look for the button that says Duplicate File. Go ahead and click that. It'll open up the Spline editor with a copy of the design. For this tutorial, don't worry about editing anything in the Spline scene unless you're curious. Now what we need to do here is export this model for use in React. So first, click the Preview option at the top of the Spline editor. This will let you test how your 3D scene looks and behaves across different screen sizes. Once that looks good, head over to the Export button, also at the top. In the Export panel, make sure Public URL is selected. Right underneath that, click on Play Settings and check that your settings match mine exactly. Once confirmed, click Update Public URL. Next, from the left-hand sidebar, click on Code Export. Here, choose React as the framework. This tells Spline to give us code that's tailored specifically for React apps. Scroll down and click Update Code Export to get the latest version. Now, Spline provides a React component that wraps your scene. All we need from here is the Spline/element itself. Just grab that single line of JSX they give you and copy it. Then head back to your code editor. Let's go ahead and paste the Spline element right here. Now, if we save our file and check the browser, it won't work just yet, and that's totally expected. That's because we haven't installed the required Spline library yet, so let's fix that. Open your terminal and first stop the development server by pressing Ctrl+C. Then run the following command, npm install @spline-tools react spline. This will install the official Spline package that gives us the Spline/component we just added. Once the installation is complete, run the app again by typing npm run dev. Now, before we see the model on screen, we also need to import the Spline library into our file. So at the very top of the hero.jsx component, add this import line, import spline from @spline-tools/react-spline. Once that's done, save the file again, refresh your browser, and boom, you should now see the 3D robot or model you selected sitting beautifully in the right section of your hero layout. Awesome, let's move on to styling and refining the position of our 3D model to make sure it fits perfectly into the layout and responds well across different screen sizes. To do that, we give this element a class name. We start by making the 3D model absolutely positioned. Next, we use eld_top_0 to align it to the top on large screens. But on smaller screens, we shift it upwards slightly to visually balance things out. It might look too low on mobile otherwise. Then we make sure it stretches from top to bottom with bottom 0, so it takes up the full vertical space available. Now let's adjust the horizontal positioning. On large screens, we place the model a bit off-center to the left. On smaller screens, we tweak that just enough to keep the model aligned without crowding the text content. And finally, we give it H full to make sure it takes up the full height of its container. That's the core positioning done. Now let's test how it behaves responsively. So open up your browser's dev tools or just manually resize the window to see how the model adjusts on mobile and tablet views. Now remember, when we were exporting the model from Spline, we enabled orbit setting. What that means is users can interact with the 3D object. They can click and drag to rotate it, which adds a really nice interactive touch. Here's something important to note. If you rotate the model and push it to the left, then switch to mobile or tablet view, it might look slightly off-center. But don't worry, that's just how the interaction state is preserved. The moment the user refreshes the page or lands on it for the first time, the model always loads in its default position, which is set inside the spline scene. The hero section now has a fully styled interactive 3D model that's responsive and sits cleanly in the layout. Perfect. Now we're going to wrap up our project with a little polish, adding reload animations using one of the easiest libraries out there, AOS. This tool lets us apply beautiful entrance animations to our elements without writing any custom animation logic ourselves. Super beginner-friendly and quick to set up. Just search for AOS, and the official site should be the very first result. Go ahead and click on that. You'll see right away that they offer a wide range of pre-built animations. But before we can use any of these animations, we need to install the AOS library in our project. For that, we go to the top right corner of the AOS website and click on the GitHub icon. That'll take us to their official GitHub repository. Once there, scroll down until you see the section titled Using Package Managers. And underneath that, you'll find the npm install command. Copy that command. Now let's go back to our code editor. Open your terminal, and before doing anything else, stop the dev server from running by pressing Ctrl+C. Then paste the command you just copied and hit Enter to install AOS into your project. After the installation finishes, you can close the terminal, and the next step is to add these two import lines to our app.jsx file. The first line is for importing the AOS library itself, and the second is for its CSS file, which includes all the styles and animations that we'll use throughout the project. So open up app.jsx, go right to the top where we normally import React or our components, and paste these two lines there. Next, in addition to those, we also need to bring in something called useEffect from React. So just add another import. Import useEffect from React. This lets us run some logic when our component first loads, and in this case, we'll use it to initialize AOS. Now scroll down into the body of the app function just above the return statement. Here we're going to initialize AOS with a simple setup. Inside useEffect, we call aos.init, and we pass in a configuration object. In that object, we set duration to 1500 milliseconds so our animations feel smooth and not rushed. And we also set once to true, so animations only run the first time a user scrolls to them. This keeps the experience polished. Once you save everything, AOS is now fully set up in our project and ready to be used. So to start, first open your terminal and run the command npm run dev to start your project back up. Now let's navigate over to the official AOS website. Our goal here is to apply some smooth reload animations, and we're going to begin with our header section. Scroll down the page until you see a section titled Different Settings Examples. This is where AOS provides various animation presets we can easily apply. The first one we're going to use is the fade down animation. So go ahead and copy the code snippet you see inside that example div. Now head back to your header.jsx file and locate the h1 element inside your header component. Paste that data attribute into this h1. Next, we'll apply the same animation style to each of the anchor tags in your navigation bar, but this time we'll give each a slightly different animation duration, so they appear in a staggered sequence. Starting with the first anchor tag, add the AOS attributes and set the duration to 1000 milliseconds. For the second anchor tag, increase that to 1500 milliseconds. For the third anchor tag, make it 2000 milliseconds. And finally, for the fourth one, set the duration to 2500 milliseconds. This will create a nice cascading animation effect as the navigation links slide into view when the page reloads. Now go ahead and refresh your browser. You should see a smooth, polished animation when the header loads. Let's keep going. Head back to the AOS website and this time scroll to the animation labeled Fade Right. Copy that snippet just like before, then open your hero.jsx file. Here, locate the main container div that wraps the left section of your hero. Add the fade right animation attributes to this div and make sure to indent it properly so everything remains neat and tidy in your JSX. Save your file, then check your browser. You'll notice the entire left section of your hero now slides into view from the right when the page reloads. Very smooth. Finally, animate our 3D model. Go back to the AOS site once more and choose the zoom in animation. Copy the code, return to your hero.jsx file, and apply this animation directly to the spline component. This is the element that renders your 3D model. In addition to the zoom in animation, we're also going to add a custom data attribute to control how long it takes to animate. Set data AOS duration to 3000 milliseconds to give this model a more dramatic entrance. Now save everything and refresh your app. You'll see that the header, the hero section, and even the 3D model now all animate beautifully as the page loads, giving your site that dynamic and interactive feel right from the start. That's it. Congratulations on completing this amazing project. You've just built a responsive, modern React web app with Tailwind CSS styling, integrated a 3D model using Spline, and added smooth reload animations using AOS. I'll be back soon with another exciting project where we'll dive into even more creative UI techniques and build on what you've just learned. Until then, keep practicing, stay curious, and as always, take care and bye-bye.